So I'm continuing on, and we're still in Walzer's Just and Unjust Wars, Part 1, The Moral Reality of War. I'm now in Chapter 3. I'll probably have a couple of videos on Chapter 3, so I'll just put a little one here. This is the first of the videos on Chapter 3, and it's the rules of war. And this would be Jus in Bello. All right, so fighting, what do we really talk about? Well, he's not going to lay out, or at least I'm not going to talk about particular rules right now in war, but just the very idea of rules in war. Walzer sometimes says that war is like actual battle, right? Is like a kind of hell, right? So think of it as it's a subdivision of hell. War is a part of hell, but it's a rule governed and a kind of and these rules are moral rules, like moral conversation and moral terms make sense when you talk about war. So this little bit of hell is kind of a moral arena. Not that it's nice or great, but it's describable. It's analyzable with moral terms like just, unjust, right, wrong, etc., etc. Okay, so now what we're talking about to begin with here in terms of this overarching theme of the moral reality of war is Walzer wants to talk about what he calls the moral equality of soldiers. And this is a fundamental view he has, and this has become quite controversial in recent years. So lots of attacks by philosophers on this claim that soldiers are morally equal. Right now, what exactly does that mean? How does he get it? Well, let's think about it. He starts off by talking about a couple of types of soldiers, like roughly. That is, soldiers who choose to fight and those forced to fight. And so historically, we have sort of those who choose. They have natural constraints. Like if everybody's entering into the battle, into war, freely choosing it, there is this sort of element of chivalry that arises, right? Well, we're all participating in this game. We're all participating of our own free will. And so these constraints arise that we're fellow combatants, kind of an aristocratic, game of kings kind of thing, or game of princes, as it was sometimes called. And so you have these notions of chivalry. And you can find it in various historical analyses of war. And Walzer, talks about, the notion of chivalry. Okay. Well, eventually, in Walzer's sort of general idea of the way war has gone, is there's been through political change, and so remember, war is deeply connected to politics, and we'll see just how much Walzer thinks war is like a political dimension, or a political arena. Through the death of chivalry is, historically it's a complicated story, but there's a few things that that help us understand it, partly because of popular passion in democracy, the rise of democracy and citizen participation. Kings are kind of getting pushed out, and you get more representative styles of government. So Democrats start basically becoming the main political players, those that hold the power. Now, what happens there? Well, as you get this, now this is just a quick little history, but as you get this, because of this sort of popular government, representative government, democratic government, these will actually feed in and increase the coercive power of the state. In other words, democratically elected governments tend to have a stronger coercive power because they supposedly have more legitimacy, right? So this popular governments, democratic governments, the state legitimacy increases. And then with that comes a sense of citizens having more duty towards the state, right? Because they're participants in it to a greater degree. And ultimately, this coercive power is really what makes, as Walzer puts it in kind of a nice turn of phrase, this ugliness of war. All right. And so what we have in the end, though, is that, yeah, there can be some soldiers that are patriotic in zeal, but not all. As Walzer says, this distinction, and he uses a poet, Louis Simpson, who talks about this change from chivalry to the battlefields of Verdun. Walzer says it certainly wasn't the case that everybody under these democratically elected governments was just full of patriotism running out to the battle. A lot of them were coerced in and also just reluctantly accepting that they have a duty to fight for family and you know and a variety of things that they play a role in, but they have this duty to support them and they go out to fight. So duty is key. Patriotism and zeal can play a role too. Yeah, sure. But largely, Walzer's talking about soldiers that are forced. Now, on the other hand, though, if we look at overall for Walzer, those who choose, right, these kinds of fighters, and those coerced, more these, we still judge their actions in battle. We don't just say that anything goes if you choose it or if you don't or whatever. We still do this. And this is important. This is what we actually do. He doesn't give an argument that we should do it or whatever. He's just saying this is a kind of, and remember when I talked about Walzer's notion of the moral reality of war, this is what we do. We judge when people go into combat, whether they were forced or whether they chose. We judge them as moral agents. You still have a responsibility to act in a moral way. Where the question is not whether or not these are moral agents on the battlefield, whether they're coerced or whether they choose freely. The question is what's the limitation or what are the boundaries of their moral responsibility, right? Even if you didn't consent to being on the battlefield, you're still on the battlefield. You're still a moral agent. What are you bound by, right? It's not the case that just because you didn't consent and then you get out there that anything goes. We don't accept that. And this is, so once again, Walzer is saying this is how we actually think of it. So he's looking at it. Again, remember the title is Just and Unjust Wars, a moral argument with historical illustrations. So he often talks about what you find, what people actually say and think and do. So he says, look at some common features of contemporary combat. Like the zeal for victory, and sometimes impatience with constraints. But he zeroes in on this one. So there's a number of features. He zeroes in on this one: hatred of the enemy. And now he says, if you look at memoirs and letters of people that have been involved in this, it gives us some, shall we say, some reflective some opportunities for some reflection on this. And he says, when we look at this from a more reflective angle, we get some results, some things we just know, right? So we know certain things. Again, you can debate this when everybody, asserts a claim to knowledge. You can basically ask, how do you know that? How can you be sure? What exactly are you talking about? Is it provisional knowledge, et cetera, et cetera? Because Walzer's not interested in doing all that philosophy. He puts his foot down quite clearly on things and says, look, we just know this, that the enemy soldier, even the ones, that choose or whatever, they're not responsible for the war, right? If they choose to sign up, or if they're coerced into signing up, they're not responsible for the war itself. So in that sense, they're blameless. They're as blameless that the enemy soldier is it. Now I'm being very careful to say the enemy soldier, an enemy soldier, not my enemy soldier, not my enemy, but the enemy. And that's important. We'll look at that. Shall we say that grammatical distinction in a second. But just think of the enemy. So the enemy soldier is not responsible. We know this. We know that he or she is blameless, right? We just know this. This is asserted. This is like a bedrock kind of premise for Walzer. And he is not responsible even if he fights for a criminal war. So like a war of aggression. We saw Walzer talk about that when war is imposed by one political entity on another. That's also important. War is a relationship between political entities, not between individuals. We'll look at that a little bit more in the next video. That's key for Walzer. So how you define war in the first place will determine how you think about it, and then will determine how you do your morality about it, the kinds of ethics that you apply, and the kinds of ethical judgments that you make. So we make judgments about individuals on the battlefield in terms of their individual actions, but Walzer is saying we don't make judgments about individuals on the battlefield in terms of their being responsible for the very existence of that battlefield. Right? That's not their fault. Even if you joined, again, even if you volunteered, you didn't create it by your volunteering. You're not the one responsible, so you're blameless. So whatever side, even if you fight on the criminal war, so there's a war of aggression and you sign up for it, you're not responsible for the war of aggression, right? You're going to be held responsible for what you do as you fight for that criminal war, but you're not held responsible for the very existence of the criminal war itself. So this is an incredibly important distinction. It's going to become something that is, it's contested, but for Walzer, that's a fundamental one, and we'll return to it a little bit more in the next video. So stay tuned.